Welcome to Turning Pages, a series of in-depth conversations with authors about their works.
All right, That Gun in Your Hand, the strange saga of Hey Joe and popular music history of violence, out through Anvil Press. Jason Schneider, the author and return guest, joins me. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be on the show again.
So, this is an interesting story, and it's kind of a sweeping one. It's and I'm curious where you started with because you kind of argue that there's a lot to unpack here. How did you start unpacking?
Well, to go back to the very beginning, I kind of became obsessed with Hey Joe, the song, from the first time I played my dad's copy of Jimi Hendrix's Are You Experienced. It was, one of those moments you have when you play a record and it's like time just stops, So, I was about 10 years old then. And from there, as my musical range expanded, I would notice, different versions of Hey Joe pop up by different artists. And, once I became, one of those geeks that had to, memorize every credit on every album, I noticed that the credit for Hey Joe was this guy, Billy Roberts. So at some point I started trying to find information about him, and there was absolutely nothing. Obviously this is the pre-internet age, and it turned out that Billy Roberts didn't even record the song himself. So really, yeah, to answer your question specifically, my motivation for the book kind of started with trying to unravel this mystery of who Billy Roberts was. And then that kind of expanded into, taking a look at, how Hey Joe played a part in just kind of the music business in the 60s, sort of awakening to this, these issues of copyright and song publishing. And then, the third aspect was just, trying to figure out why Hey Joe just became such a popular song for so many different artists to cover, especially after Jimi Hendrix's death, which is kind of why the book is split into two parts. The first part's kind of everything leading up to Jimi, and then the second part is post Jimi.
So you start with Jimi, so everything that leads up to him is kind of where you started too. In terms of, like you said, this is pre-internet when you first become aware of this, and you're looking for Billy Roberts. Like, could you have done a book like this without the internet? Like, did you find that that opened things up for you?
Oh yeah, definitely. The real kind of, the big door that opened for me was, finding this website that a guy from somewhere in Europe, I can't remember which country, he created essentially just to try to catalog every known version of Hey Joe, which, as you can imagine, is a pretty daunting task. There's literally hundreds of versions of it. But through that website, a lot of the people who would comment on his posts, I soon saw, they had, direct contact with Billy Roberts over the years, people who knew him, people who worked with him. And really through that, I made a lot of really important connections, and fortunately got to talk to a lot of these people, most notably a woman named Niela Miller, who was Billy's girlfriend when he lived in Greenwich Village in the early 60s. And she had a song. She was a folk singer as well, and she had a song called "Baby Please Don't Go to Town," which, you can hear it on YouTube. It's remarkably similar in a lot of ways to Hey Joe. So, that led to kind of the question of ownership again. But really, this was all kind of part of the whole folk music oral tradition, which, we could possibly talk about as well. But from there it gets really complicated.
Let's talk about that folk music and the complications that arise. And Like, how much of that were you aware of going into this story? Like, did you know about, like, because like you said, you saw Hey Joe pop up on other records once you kind of became aware of it via Jimi Hendrix, and then started noticing, written by Billy Roberts, but like there are also instances where it's like, credited to traditional, it's credited to other writers. Like, did you know that going into this story, or is that something you discovered along the way?
Yeah, surprisingly, I didn't. I didn't really know that much. I mean, my knowledge of the Greenwich Village scene sort of begins with with Bob Dylan, as most people do. But the interesting thing about Billy's career, he arrived in Greenwich Village. He was originally from South Carolina, and he came almost exactly a year before Bob Dylan arrived from Minnesota. So we're talking about the start of 1960, and at that time, yeah, like the singers in that scene, they were very strict about this folk music or oral tradition. Most of them, well, number one, very few of them wrote original material, and those who did, they saw it as kind of like a badge of honor to have other artists play their songs. No one was really concerned about copyright or even recording. I found a great interview with the singer, the late Richie Havens, who said that at that time most of these artists saw recording as actually a hassle. They didn't want to make records, which is kind of hard to believe today. But yeah, but that was the attitude that most of these people had, and Dylan obviously really changed that. With his writing, and then signing a publishing deal. He was, that was truly a game changer when artists realized that hey, this is the way to actually make money, is to write songs and have them published.
So that discovery for you, like, are you reading archival interviews? Are you reading other authors' histories? Are you reading, Village Voices and other kinds of like first person sources back in the day? Like, how do you go about kind of assembling the context in which this is happening?
Yeah, it was a little bit of all of that, but but mainly, I wanted to focus on kind of putting the pieces together about Billy Roberts's life, and getting to speak with Niella. That was obviously huge. She gave me a lot of great details, and then kind of filling in the gaps a little bit. Because Billy, he actually didn't stay in Greenwich Village that long. He was there for maybe a year at the most, before he kind of moved on. He spent some time in Washington D.C. after that for a little bit, which was proved to be crucial for him, because being in Washington, he one day he just decided to go to the Library of Congress, and ended up getting Hey Joe copyrighted, which as I said, he just having that documentation was the main proof that he wrote the song. But then he moved on again, out west. He spent some time in Reno, Nevada, actually to get a divorce, but he made some important new connections there, which brought him to San Francisco, where he ended up settling pretty much for most of the 1960s. So it was all just about kind of like following these strands, and meeting these people who knew him along the way. And it was that was probably the most fun aspect of writing this book, was discovering all these things that I knew no one else had ever written about before.
When you go in a conversation with like someone like Niella, like, do you go with a specific list of things you're trying to find out, or are you kind of open-ended or vague about your questions to allow discovery about like kind of things you didn't know?
Yeah, I always, whenever I've I do interviews or I've done interviews, yeah, I always just try to, get the person I'm talking to, go on as much as they feel comfortable doing. I think I remember, that goes back to, I remember reading an interview with the great critic Greil Marcus, who famously he never really did a lot of interviews himself or speaking to other artists. I mean, but he always said whenever he did, he always just asked open-ended questions just to get the person he was interviewing to talk as much as they could and reveal as much. So yeah, I've always kind of kept that in the back of my head whenever I've done interviews.
So when you're going into a conversation like that, I guess like are you hoping to glean specific things, or do you just kind of let it go where it is and then try to sift through that and ask follow-ups afterwards? Like just in terms of how you get the raw material you need for a book like this I'm curious about that.
I think it's a little bit of a combination of both. I mean, talking to Niella, for example, I kind of knew going into our conversation, the whole controversy about, did Billy steal Hey Joe from her? So obviously, I wanted to get her point of view on that, but I also wanted to confirm, through her some of the information I already had, and yeah, I did that with some of the other people I interviewed as well. Especially once the song started to be recorded by other artists in the mid '60s. Yeah, there was a lot of confusion about about ownership of the song. So kind of trying to work my way through all of that, I really needed to have other people confirm some of this information I already had. And yeah, pretty much, in every case, it was great. I mean, yeah, like to write a research book like this, just to have anyone kind of confirm what you already know, always feels good.
You'd mentioned that European website, kind of chronicling all the different iterations of Hey Joe. Obviously, this book doesn't deal with all of them, but like, how did you kind of figure out which ones you would tell the story of and incorporate into this kind of sweeping look at the history of this song?
Well, some of them were obvious ones. I mean, when I was kind of like creating the outline with the different chapters, there were a few obvious ones that needed to be focused on. The Patti Smith's version. Also, later on, Nick Cave's version. But I also wanted to demonstrate how the song was really applied to just this wide variety of musical genres, going from soul music, the versions by Wilson Pickett and Lee Moses, to its impact on well, it's hard to say impact, but the way it kind of fit into reggae with Black Uhuru, and also into the 1980s and hip hop with the version that Ice-T's metal band Body Count did. So yeah, obviously I couldn't address every version of Hey Joe, although I did try to kind of make up for that in the discography, but mainly in the main parts of the book, I just wanted to show how it kind of fit in with all these different genres.
Now, you obviously had to kind of narrow the aperture a bit to some versions of Hey Joe for the scope of this book, but you do open things up a little bit to include some other songs to look at the notion of like murder ballads and violence in song. Was that in that original outline, or did you find yourself incorporating that after you'd written kind of the first draft?
Yeah, I've always been a fan of murder ballads, and you know, um, you know, listening to Jimmy's version of Hey Joe was maybe my entry point to that in some ways. So yeah, I really did want to kind of take Hey Joe back to excuse me, its origins in murder ballads. And yeah, I mean, that was maybe kind of a you know, a leap I wanted to take, but yeah, it all made sense to me. I mean, you know, you can go back and listen to any number of the songs I referenced, from you know, Stagger Lee to you know, Little Sadie, you know, Pretty Polly. That Pretty Polly, that was actually a song that, you know, Niella Miller told me had a profound influence on her. So yeah, you know, I'm just a huge fan of, you know, early 20th century music, you know, especially blues and country. So yeah, diving back into that world was you know, a very exciting thing to write about as well.
Was there a point at which you were kind of like you had to kind of constrain yourself? Because as you point out, you know, crimes of passion play an integral role in art throughout human history, and so like limiting yourself or in some way narrowing the scope of the book like had to have been a concern, because you could go on at length if you open it up to like any and all murder ballads or crimes of passion that, you know, fit the Hey Joe mold.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you know, there are, you know, countless examples of songs throughout the 20th century that, you know, reference guns or you know, people getting murdered. And yeah, I mean, looking at it again now from our modern lens, it's kind of incredible just how much a part of, you know, contemporary music that sort of violence that played. So yeah, I guess as an overarching thesis, I wanted to kind of, you know, to try to find some answers about why that was. Why have, you know, violent songs always been so popular? Um and you know, in some ways, I did always want to write, you know, a book about Jimi Hendrix as well. Um, but what prevented me from doing that was just, you know, the fact that his life has been dissected to the point where, you know, I really couldn't see myself adding anything new to it. So really just showing how he he became kind of this focal point in the history of Hey Joe, where, you know, as you know, being the first black artist to record it, he, you know, injected his life experience into the song, and then through that I feel that kind of like opened the door for pretty much anyone to kind of take the song and, you know, interpret it in their own way.
So the song's kind of like the gasoline, and he's the match that lights it on fire in some way.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good way to put it for sure.
You mentioned obviously like this is there's kind of a few different threads. There's the Roberts thread and you know, his life and history. There's this song and the larger scope of violence and song, and then there's like the music business is a like recurring story. Did you realize you were like gonna have to like weave these all together as you were kind of like plotting out what the book would be?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, and yeah, again, those were kind of the three pillars I was kind of building upon. You know, Billy Roberts' story, you know, the impact of Hey Joe, and then yes, as you described, how this song became part of, you know, this I guess, coming of age, within the music business in the 1960s, where songwriters really began to, stake a claim, really. Again, starting with Bob Dylan. So, the popularity that of Hey Joe really created this urgency, I guess, really for someone to claim ownership of it. And that's where we get into, I got into kind of the discussion of other artists like Dino Valenti, who claimed ownership of it. Another folk singer named Tim Rose, who recorded a completely different arrangement of it, claiming he had never heard it before. And Tim Rose's version actually became the one that Jimmy based his version on most closely. But yeah, it's incredible to think that in this kind of like 18-month, 2-year period between like 1965 and 66, there were, literally dozens of versions of Hey Joe floating around out there with nobody, having any clue of who wrote it. So so finally, when it all got sorted out, and Billy Roberts rightly, became known as the songwriter, I think that really kind of opened up a lot of artists' eyes as to, again, the importance of controlling your publishing.
Yeah, you have obviously, talk about him going to the Library of Congress in 1962. Like in 1966, Valenti, is credited as sole composer on a recording of Hey Joe. That like this did not happen immediately, and it took a lot of sorting. And that's part of the story that I found most interesting was kind of like this behind the scenes of it, and the way the song lived, and was kind of like slippery to pin down.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for pointing that out. I really want it. Well, I mean, that's where the attention to detail really came into play, because I certainly wanted to get all the facts as close as I could to what really happened. But yeah, even when Jimmy recorded the song, when he went over to England, I mean, nobody in England at that time knew anything about the history of Hey Joe. I mean, people, fans of, the Byrds obviously knew the song through their recording, but yeah, most people in England assumed it was just another, traditional American folk song. So even when Jimmy released it as his first single, it was credited as a traditional. So it took another probably 6 to 8 months for Jimmy's version to properly be credited to Billy Roberts. So it's, again, I found it enlightening that there's all these kind of assumptions that we have now about the music business, that everyone kind of knows what they're doing, and with everything, all the T's get crossed and the I's get dotted. But back at that time, still in like the mid to late 60s, a lot of these people in the business were still kind of making it up as they went along.
Despite that, though, the dissemination of this song, particularly post '67 when Hendrix does it, it happens quite quickly. Because I noted that in your discography at the end, you've got a Japanese group, the Golden Cups, recording it in 1968. Like that, like it had spread to U.S. Army base in Yokohama, and that like this song had global reach very quickly.
Yeah, and I feel really, the Golden Cups version was one of the one of the last ones I kind of stumbled upon as I was finishing the book, and I'm so glad I did, because yeah, as you rightly point out, it illustrates the point that, Hey Joe had this kind of weird, universal appeal. And yeah, I still haven't kind of come up with a, definitive answer as to why that is. I mean, number one, I think just the song's basic structure, the chord structure, the famous circle of fifths, where, you know the chord progression is never really resolved. And lyrically, again, the song is arranged as a conversation between these two people, and there's no chorus. So really, it's the kind of song that I feel, the minute you start listening to it, you just kind of, naturally get sucked into the story, where you're overhearing this conversation, between these two people about a murder. And I think that really, touches something deep inside all of us, well, especially, anyone who's a fan of true crime podcasts, or anything like that. Yeah, like I think it really, in its simple form, it just really gets to this heart of darkness, I think, all of us possess to a certain degree.
Yeah, that's one of the kind of final little bits that you write about before the postscript, that like, this is, I mean, crimes of passion, as you point out, artistically have been plumbed, for centuries, but that, each generation has sort of its own relationship to this, and so they endure in different ways, and so this song obviously has had a long life at this point.
So yeah, to your point about that, I also, have to give credit to my good friend and colleague Michael Barkley, who, noted the song "Shot My Baby" by Daniel Caesar, which I wasn't aware of. But after listening to it, even though it's not a cover of Hey Joe, it's, basically telling the same story, which I found, really interesting. Like, here we are in 2025, and artists are still writing songs about these violent acts. So I don't know. So yeah, what does that say about us? I guess I tried to give some kind of answer, but it might take someone else to write another book about that.
Well, like I said, it's one of the threads. Obviously, the Billy Roberts thread, the music business thread, like that. There are these interwoven things, and that's ultimately the thing about art, right? Like it's interwoven with the society in which it exists, and so a book like this can't help but explore all of these things.
Yeah, and I think I think looking back, I guess the whole arc of the book, I wanted it to span kind of like the entire century, from the earliest, recordings up until recent years. I think we're at a time, certainly in terms of music history and music criticism, where, we can kind of look back at this century now with maybe clearer eyes of, things, how it all evolved, especially in this day and age when, the argument is that music really has no value, not personal value, obviously, but just, in terms of financial value to the artists and the record companies that make it. But, yeah, so maybe, I guess, in some ways I see the book as this sort of time capsule, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, 100%. Maybe the only person to which it has no value is Daniel Ek, who's using the money to finance AI weaponry. So maybe music is still wrestling with violence. That Gun in Your Hand is out through Anvil Press. Jason, thanks for joining me on the program. Congrats on the release of the book.
Oh, thanks again, Michael. Yeah, it was my pleasure to talk to you.